the Supplementary Appropriations Bill, National Assembly Bill number 4 of 2023. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I want to thank the members for the very robust engagements that you had yesterday in considering the estimates. And because, Mr. Speaker, even prior to having an opportunity to serve in the Budget and Appropriations Committee, possibly I could also not understand a lot of what happens in terms of processes. And some members could be wondering, then what is it that we passed yesterday and what are we doing today? Mr. Speaker, what we passed yesterday are the estimates, and for that to become now law, Mr. Speaker, we need to put it in a bill, which, as you said earlier, Mr. Speaker, it is just the reflection of the issues that we were discussing yesterday. There are no changes other than semantics, but we need now to actualize that by putting it into an appropriations bill, and that is the bill that we are, Mr. Speaker, dealing with today. Mr. Speaker, I'll just say a few things because we had an opportunity to say much more yesterday, so that even the time that could be there, other members who never got an opportunity yesterday can get an opportunity to say something about the supplementary estimates and supplementary appropriations bill today. Number one, Mr. Speaker, is that in this administration, and even as we craft the budget, as the house that makes the budget, we are focusing more on production. Mr. Speaker, for us to be able to solve the myriad of problems that our economy is going through, Mr. Speaker, our focus must be on production. And the way we are looking at production as the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and Mr. Speaker, even what we have been able to table in this House, and what we are currently debating today, our focus has primarily been on production. And Mr. Speaker, on production, on the onset, we are focusing on the primary production, and the primary production is that what deals with raw materials and production of things that are raw in nature. And Mr. Speaker, that is why we have given a lot of resources and a lot of weight in production based in agriculture. And Mr. Speaker, I would request that members improve upon this issue in a robust manner. When we talk about agriculture, sometimes we confuse agriculture with farming. Mr. Speaker, in the agricultural value chain, farming accounts for just around 20 to 25%. The activities that farmers do in their farms, sometimes we confuse that to agriculture. That is just one segment within the value chain of agriculture, which is purely farming. And Mr. Speaker, there are other processes within the value chain of agriculture. Warehousing is part of agriculture. Transportation is part of agriculture. Breeding and blending is part of agriculture. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, our focus is on the entire value chain so that we can have as much value being retained around in terms of within the country, and especially having a lot of value pushed to where the farmer is, so that, Mr. Speaker, the farmer's sweat and the farmer's hard work, that can be commensurated with the kind of value they get out of farming, which is within the value chain of agriculture. Mr. Speaker, also, our focus number two is on the secondary production. The secondary production, Mr. Speaker, is in regards to adding value to whatever we have, whatever raw material that we have, whatever raw production that we do, in terms of how we can add value into that. And Mr. Speaker, that is primarily manufacturing. Manufacturing has various stages, but you have looked at it as a block, Mr. Speaker, from very basic production in terms of secondary production within manufacturing to as much as robust, Mr. Speaker. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, our focus is on how, even as we add value in terms of primary production, how much more value can we retain by also incorporating secondary production, Mr. Speaker, that is purely manufacturing in nature. The other one is tertiary, and tertiary, Mr. Speaker, is in regards to the services around the first two that I gave. And Mr. Speaker, I wish to draw the attention of this House to how our economy currently is. Our economy, as it currently operates, Mr. Speaker, is that the drivers of our economy is actually the public sector. It is the government. And the other number two, Mr. Speaker, the driver of our economy is what I would call facilitative arm of the economy, where if you look at the growth on fintech, the growth in service industry, Mr. Speaker, we have had now the productive side leapfrogging the facilitative side, where we have very innovative people. We have banks now that are now in our phones. We have very robust fintech products like M-Pesa. We have a growing service sector in terms of insurance, in terms of banking. But, Mr. Speaker, we have to be aware of the fact that the facilitative side of the economy should serve the productive side. And when we have the facilitative side of the economy growing much faster than the real productive side, then there is a problem. Because, Mr. Speaker, when I send money from my phone to the other person, there is no value I create. The only thing I do, or that app does, is to facilitate efficiency within the economy. And therefore, we need to also focus on the real production. And that production is what we have focused on in terms of agriculture, in terms of manufacturing, so that the facilitative side can grow in tandem with the real productive side of the economy. And what we have done, Mr. Speaker, in regards to that, is that we have also looked at the enablers. As we talk about production, as we talk about adding value to our gross production, what are the enablers? And that is the reason why, Mr. Speaker, we were able to salvage 10 billion Kenya shillings from whatever area we could save to push that money into roads so that we can have the economy running smoothly. Because the essence of roads, Mr. Speaker, is not just for social travel. The essence of road and other infrastructure is that the economy runs on them. And, Mr. Speaker, that is why we put money onto the roads. Because whatever we carry from our farms, whatever we carry from our industries, majority of it, Mr. Speaker, passes through our roads. And that is the same reason that we unlocked 12 billion Kenya shillings from the annuity fund so that we can push the same resources into making sure that the contractors go back to site to finish on our roads projects. Mr. Speaker, the reason why we exist as this House, as an arm of government, and the other reason that every other civil servant exists, from the highest to the top, to those at the lower cadre, we do not exist to serve the machinery of government. The machinery of government does not exist to self-serve. This machinery exists to serve the needs of the Kenyan people. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we are focusing on having a lean government, because the government is the machinery for service, so that we can push as much resources into the areas that touches on the common person, the people who labor, the people, Mr. Speaker, who work hard, and the people who pay taxes, the very dignified citizens of the Republic of Kenya. And in that regard, Mr. Speaker, we have looked at specific areas and targets. And I want to enumerate some of them that are already in the appropriations bill, Mr. Speaker, that we are passing today. Number one, Mr. Speaker, is that through this appropriations bill, we are unlocking a very robust project, which is the coolers project. And these coolers, Mr. Speaker, they have been mapped to go to every constituency represented here, and especially every constituency that has got dairy farming that happens in those constituencies. Mr. Speaker, we have allocated Kenya shillings 500 million, which is counterpart funding, because we have the Polish government providing 9.5 billion to that project, Mr. Speaker, and therefore we are going to have a 10 billion project that will supply coolers to our farmers as part of value addition within the agricultural value chain. Mr. Speaker, this is a very robust program. The government of Kenya, through this appropriations bill, is only contributing 5% counterpart funding, which is already provided. Number two, some of the areas that I wish to mention among the many. Mr. Speaker, through food security, it is a shame that our economy is agrarian in nature. If you ask any child in any business class, even in class 1, our economy is deemed to be an economy that rides on agriculture. Mr. Speaker, it is an oxymoron and a paradox that an economy that is based on agriculture has challenges in feeding its people. And Mr. Speaker, this cuts across many economies across. Majority of the economies that are premised on agriculture has problems feeding their people. And actually the economies that focuses on other productions other than agriculture, their people have problems of overfeeding. Mr. Speaker, that is a paradox. And to reverse that paradox, Mr. Speaker, we have pushed resources into specific areas within food production. Number one, there is a project that had been abandoned in Tana River, Mr. Speaker, undertaken by TARDA. Mr. Speaker, we have allocated 500 million Kenya shillings that will go into production of rice, because there is no way we can perpetuate importation of rice when we have capacity to unlock the projects that we already have in that regard. Mr. Speaker, through this appropriations bill also, we have unlocked another very serious project, which is called Bura-1. This is also an abandoned project, which we have pushed 300 million Kenya shillings to be able to activate that project, Mr. Speaker, to spur up rice production in our country. That rice production, Mr. Speaker, will also be happening in Tana River. And I want to confirm to this House that within our country, some of the areas that we see as far-flung, Mr. Speaker, they could be the saviors of our country, just like what Los Angeles did to the US. Mr. Speaker, some of these areas are productive. They only need some simple mechanization for them to add into the basket, and especially the basket of food. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to mention one other project that the President of Kenya, His Excellency William Samoei Ruto, promised to the people of Kisumu and Homa Bay. Mr. Speaker, there are always challenges when the very dignified citizens of Kenya move from the mainland into the islands, Mr. Speaker, within Lake Victoria. They have challenges with very unsafe boats. Mr. Speaker, the President promised that the people of that area will have a ferry to be able to facilitate them, Mr. Speaker, to move from the mainland into the islands. And Mr. Speaker, I can confirm to this House that through this appropriations bill, we have allocated Kenya shillings 300 million for the purchase of ferries, Mr. Speaker, to be able to facilitate trade and movement within Homa Bay and Kisumu counties through Lake Victoria. Mr. Speaker, through the same visit that the President had, he got, Mr. Speaker, opinions from the leaders who are actually in this House. And I want to confirm that we have put in the initial budget to be able to build Homa Bay Kapude airstrip, Mr. Speaker. And that will also be starting very soon, because that money is already in the appropriations bill. And I can say Dr. Nyikal is resonating with what I'm enumerating. Mr. Speaker, also, in terms of creating value by having the young people of Kenya engaged in productive areas, we have also allocated through this appropriations bill Kenya shillings 1.3 billion, Mr. Speaker, to be able to facilitate additional infrastructure within the River EPZ-A. Mr. Speaker, we already have many investors lined up who are willing to invest in garment and apparel sector. And Mr. Speaker, you know for sure that the economies that have actually advanced even up to now, their basis of manufacturing was the basic manufacturing. And basic manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, cuts across apparels, garments, and areas around clothing. And Mr. Speaker, we have facilitated EPZ to build more sheds for the investors who are already lined up to employ the majority of the Kenyan youth who will be engaged in those EPZ sheds. Mr. Speaker, just for the clarification for members who were not here yesterday, I want to reinforce that we have been in talks with the Treasury, And they have already released Kenya shillings 14 billion to NGCDF board. Mr. Speaker, by close of this week, we anticipate that every constituency should be having no less than 45 million to be able to disburse bursaries. And in that regard, Mr. Speaker, I'll talk about GAF. I can hear lovely voices from the very able women reps. I'll talk about it. In this appropriations bill, Mr. Speaker, we have also added two things in regards to NGCDF and GAF. And starting with GAF, the women reps in this house, they are very aware that their activities have been handicapped in the past because of coordinators and because the monies that are already provided, we needed some funds to unlock that money. We have provided enough money for that in that regard, in terms of coordinators and in terms of facilitating the unlocking of the monies that are already provided in the main budget. That has already happened through this appropriations bill. And in regards to NGCDF, Mr. Speaker, there are over 200 constituencies which have arrears for the last financial year to a tune of 12 million per constituency. Mr. Speaker, through this appropriations bill, when the President assents to it by Friday, we are going to unlock the 12 million per constituency which are in arrears, and they should be paid anytime after the assent of this bill by His Excellency the President. We have provided Kenya shillings 2.9 billion in that regard, and we have actually factored in entirety the entire arrears in terms of NGCDF. Mr. Speaker, as I come to the finish, the other very important matters that we have done, I talked about the teachers yesterday. We have passed Article 223 expenditure in regards to the teachers' recruitment, which is ongoing in terms of JSS, junior secondary schools. And we have also allocated, Mr. Speaker, through this appropriations bill, an additional 9 billion Kenya shillings for capitation for JSS. And we have done this because the essence of JSS and CBC is that we do not want to push the burden to parents. And the President gave us direct commitments that he wants the JSS learners and the parents not to carry extra burden. And therefore, the government is capitalizing every learner through capitation, monies that we have already input in this appropriations bill to a tune of 9 billion Kenya shillings. Mr. Speaker, there are many other areas which I will leave for the members to get an opportunity to comment on, and I wish to move, Mr. Speaker, and if you permit, I can call the seconder. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to request Honorable Dan Mwasha